Chris, who are you sort of pinning as the potential winner in Las Vegas?
I'm going to say Max Verstappen. And that comes with a lot of risk because, as we've seen in Brazil and as we've seen in Mexico, there's every opportunity for Red Bull to not get it right. And hopefully, sorry, McLaren fans, but I'm always wearing the hat of what's the most exciting way for the season to go right down to the wire and keep the most interest in it. Hopefully, Mercedes is then still strong enough to be ahead of McLaren too, and at best, McLaren are fighting over 4th and 5th, maybe even further back, and then that could breathe a bit more life into the championship.
Welcome to the RACER Debrief. I'm Lawrence Foster, and looking ahead to F1's third and final visit to the US for the year, we've got RACER's man in the Formula One paddock, Chris Medland, joining us. Chris, lots of things to cover, but first of all, that championship battle. Do we have a three-way title fight still, or are the nuances around it now?
I say we still have one, but it is based on needing something crazy to happen in Vegas. But it's also because I feel like something could happen in Vegas. So Max, I spoke to Lauren Mekies at the start of the weekend in Brazil, and he said, we need to just stay alive this weekend. We've got to stay in the fight. McLaren looked strong, expected to be strong, hit the ground running at the start of a sprint weekend. 2 point scoring opportunities for a team. They were up against it, Red Bull, and clearly didn't get the car right. But heading to Vegas, it being so much colder, such a track that really did not suit McLaren last year. The pace Red Bull did show when they got the car right on Sunday in Brazil, but also at times at other venues earlier in the year, in like Monza and in Baku. Baku I kind of look at as maybe slightly similar towards Vegas in terms of track layouts. So I think there's some reasons for optimism that Red Bull could have a race-winning car, but even more so that McLaren might not have one for the final time this season. And that's not to say that they can't surprise us, but that it might be a weekend where maybe a Mercedes, maybe even a Ferrari can be there fighting or ahead of McLaren. And if you get that scenario play out with Max winning and a couple of Mercedes ahead of the McLarens, and then maybe an instant or two that means Lando is 6th or 7th rather than 5th or 4th, then suddenly the point swing is big enough that he is right in the fight with 2 to go. I still think it'd be a tall order from there because there'll be 2 tracks that McLaren should go well at. But I do think it's every chance that he could at least create that intrigue going to the final 2 rounds. So for now, as much as that is a tall order, it still is theoretically possible in a way that I don't think is crazy.
Hi, quick timeout to tell you about something special. You are going to want to visit racer.com/bundle. RACER just dropped a bundle for real motorsports fans. It includes RACER Plus, the new streaming home for everything from WRC and Dakar to DTM, Crandon, the Isle of Man TT, drifting, and even these podcasts, all in one place. You name it. This is a full spectrum of racing, from grassroots to global, off-road to electric, 2 wheels or 4, and it's a spectacular deal. Head to racer.com/bundle to sign up now. All right, back to the show. So theoretical, and you put on a compelling case there. I've got to remember as well, obviously, that last year it was George Russell, it was Mercedes, it was something where the order, as you say, was changed around. McLaren not looking particularly top dogs at Vegas last year. If we're talking McLaren, say, being a 5th and 6th place car or whatever in Vegas, we've got that 24-point buffer between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Are we into that stage now where 3 races, 3 Grand Prix and 1 sprint, that Lando can start to approach it, this is what I've got to do against Oscar, as opposed to this is what I've got to do?
Yeah, absolutely. He says he's not going to, but find me a driver that doesn't actually think that way in terms of it's risk management, everything they do behind the wheel. And the risk management now for Lando is, I have this space, do I need to throw it down the inside and risk losing a front wing at a certain time in a Grand Prix, certainly Vegas, for example, if it's not for the win? Because I do think that if it doesn't suit McLaren, that actually then really does suit Lando, because it should mean Oscar can't score too heavily either. And if Oscar can't score too heavily, then that gives Lando every chance of actually making making sure he doesn't lose too much ground, or if anything does extend to Oscar, but in small margins. So I think it actually takes a bit of the pressure off him. It's just making sure by being maybe in the pack, you're not involved in an incident and you give up a chunk of points. But I think the pressure much more is on Oscar. One, to respond after the run he's had. The pace was there in Brazil at times, but the last 3 races in particular have not been his strongest. And then if he can respond, it's not only does it have to be good from him, it has to be better than Lando. And the form Lando's been in, that looks like a tall order. So I think the pressure actually, the way that Norris handled Brazil means the pressure's come off him a little bit more heading to Vegas. And I still actually think the bigger curveball is if Max came roaring back into the fight there. Right. If Lando comes through that one unscathed, I think he's in a really, really strong position.
This is RACER, your all-access pass to the best motorsports, performance, and car culture. Get RACER Plus for live races, extended highlights, breaking news, and fan-favorite build and enthusiast shows, all in one place. From Formula Drift to off-road mayhem.
A full-blown nail-biter.
Supercars to grassroots brawls. Garages to rare collectors. Stream it all, anytime, anywhere. This is about machines and the people who move the culture forward. And when the screen fades, the story continues in RACER Magazine, a collectible trusted by champions, creators, and connoisseurs. Every page, a deeper dive into the soul of speed and performance. RACER Plus and RACER Magazine, the ultimate bundle. Built for the obsessed, powered by passion.
You talk about Max, and basically the Dutch Grand Prix was almost like a reset for Red Bull. You look at Max's scoring since then. I mean, 7 races, 3 wins, 2 second places, 2 thirds. I'm really bad at maths, but it's almost like Max single-handedly has almost outscored the 2 McLaren boys combined in that 7-race stretch. At the same time, this sort of spectacular is probably the wrong word, but significant drop-off in terms of what Oscar is delivering. I mean, basically, if the championship does go Lando's way, and we don't have the shock result of Max kind of like putting it together in the next couple, has Oscar sort of lost it as opposed to Lando has won it going over this home stretch?
I'd say no. I mean, your maths were pretty good, actually. I think it was heading to Mexico.
Really?
So before Mexico, I think it was equal in terms of the points Max had scored since the summer break and McLaren combined. So it was that close then. But since then, obviously, back-to-back wins for Lando has pushed that up.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, this car had got difficult. It had got tricky. And something that Oscar was doing was handling it well. Lando was the one who was making little mistakes quite often during the summer. He said he wasn't fully comfortable with the car. Quite often he'd come out of qualifying and say he'd messed up in certain places, would get it wrong in his first Q3 run, easy for me to say, but also then would put him under pressure for the second one and couldn't get the job done. And we were seeing much more consistency when it was a bit tricky from Oscar. Well, if anything, the car got trickier compared to the Red Bull, at least. In the face of that pressure from Verstappen and the run that Red Bull went on, the McLaren clearly wasn't the dominant car anymore. And through that, that's where Lando stepped up. And at a time where actually, I think you've got to look at the fact that Oscar's dropped away is because it's not been easy. Lando has performed really well when it's not been easy. It's not like suddenly the McLaren was always 30 seconds up the road. Like, yes, it was in Mexico, but it wasn't anywhere else. And if it had been that way, then you could maybe make the argument that Oscar had dropped the ball. I think Oscar's gone through a tough patch, but at a time that, it can happen during the season. Lando went through one earlier in the year, but Lando has coincided that with a really, really strong bit of form. And he thinks he's just found his feet a little better in terms of not overdriving and believing in his own ability that when it all comes together, he is good enough and he doesn't need to go and prove that to anyone. And that is something that we've heard Lando talk about before. He puts pressure on himself, and he's talked about recently blocking out the outside noise because it does get to him. With Oscar, I don't think it ever did. I think his drop-off is actually partly because he surprised himself how much he struggled in Baku. He drove a bit angry there, I think, after what happened in Monza, where he'd moved over, followed the team order to swap positions after a slow pit stop for Lando. Don't think he was too pleased with the fact that A, he'd lost some points there, but B, whether he'd made the right call. Wanted to go out and really just hammer home an advantage and almost erase the memory of 2 weeks earlier. And it was a scrappy weekend from both him and the team. And then he overdrove, made some mistakes, crashed out. And that was so unlike him that I think that knocked his confidence. Then he needed to adapt his driving to the car for a couple of weekends that didn't quite suit him. With this lack of confidence, it snowballed a bit. But we did see the signs of him coming back in Brazil. We did see some better performance there. I think we just have to give credit actually at that point to Norris still being that tiny step ahead.
It's strange because Oscar Piastri seemed to be the one who was completely unfazed by any circumstances. You always get the impression that if anybody overthinks, anybody overanalyzes, that it's Lando. But to sort of hear Oscar over the last 2 or 3 races at times admit he doesn't know what to sort of do to get back totally on the bead, is that something where, Lando experience, having been through things before, this is maybe seen a difference in experience levels and how he handled these situations between the pair of them?
Potentially. I do think we've got to remember, actually, one of the things I thought was a strength of Oscar's for a lot this season, until he struggled over the last few rounds, was the fact that he was more recently in a title fight. It was the F2 championship, but he'd won consecutive championships trying to prove himself and get to F1. In many ways, you could say where the pressure's higher, because there's no guarantee. He didn't have the McLaren deal. He had Alpine backing, but as we saw from Alpine, they don't always give their drivers a chance, or if they do, they don't give them much of one. So with Oscar's future, he had to prove himself with results all the time. And dealing with that pressure, I thought, got better and better at it. I feel like he kind of limped over the line slightly in F3 when he should have sewn it up earlier. But then in F2, he learned from that just 1 year later and really delivered the goods impressively. Now, that wasn't that long ago that he could call on that experience. Whereas for Lando, it was. There's 4 years difference between them coming into F1, or in terms of their seasons racing in F1. So I did feel like actually that had been a strength of Oscar's. I actually just think it is, for Lando, it's maybe that he needed other people around him at the right time to say to him, with this wealth of experience, with the performances you've delivered in the past, you are good enough. You do not need to overthink this. You do not need to overstress it. And maybe other people helped him find that kind of sweet spot. And it might have been slightly easier to eventually find this year because of the history he's got in the sport, but with the team. He's been with McLaren for so long, they know him inside out. And there's a telling line from Lando actually in Brazil where he said that some of his team know him better than he knows himself, and he's had to kind of lean on that. I think for Oscar, that's where it's more, as a more inexperienced driver in Formula One, he's still going through a bit of that process. You could say that this opportunity to win a title has kind of come too soon in both McLaren's development as a team, because it certainly did last year. They weren't ready to win a title with drivers last year, the way they handled it. This year, they've tried to keep it equal. It's a tough thing to do. But also, Oscar's only in his 3rd year, and he's still got a lot of developing to do as a driver. So I think it's kind of a combination of those things to why you've then got that discrepancy between the two at what's been a crucial time. But we're still talking less than a race win. I mean, someone might watch this back heading into Abu Dhabi, and it could be Oscar ahead by 24 points if things have gone his way, or certainly level. And there's been nothing to pit between them throughout the whole season. So I wouldn't be surprised to see us get to that point, that it is going down to the wire. And at that stage, we'd barely be able to separate them.
I mean, as you say, one wins difference between them. 24 points. We've got 83, I think, still up for grabs, including the sprinting kata. One DNF, one guy completely dominating at the other extreme, and the tables have turned. So, Chris, you said obviously that Oscar was looking a bit more sort of dialed in and back in the groove in Brazil. Come the race, we have that 10-second penalty. We have it where, on the one hand, we seem to have F1 rules applied to the letter. On the other hand, we seem to have it where there is a complete disregard is probably the word, but a sort of nobody is thinking that these are guys racing. Just go through, basically remind people of what happened with Oscar in Brazil, and then I want your take on the laws, the theories as they applied in practice.
Yeah, settle in, everybody, because I'm ready for this one. This is I've got a proper high horse to get stuck into on this, because, it was a safety car restart, so not the race start, but early in the race, restart that was a rolling start from Lando Norris. Kimi Antonelli starting 2nd, Charles Leclerc 3rd, Oscar's 4th in the queue, and Antonelli gets a poor restart. Lando leaves it quite late on the pit straight to drop the hammer. Antonelli reacting, gets too much wheel spin on a bit of damp patch as well, but I think just gets a bit eager. And that means he doesn't get a great run. So both Leclerc and Piastri are coming at him. Leclerc goes to the outside because Antonelli's kind of defended half of the inside. Piastri's got enough of a run at speed that he then goes to the inside, because also Antonelli wasn't able to completely cover the inside line, given he would have just given a free run at the apex to Leclerc if he did that. He needed to kind of squeeze him further wide if he could. So it was complex to him in that sense. Antonelli ends up in the middle. Leclerc can see this, and this is very impressive from his point of view on the outside, that they're now 3 wide heading into the corner. And just before they hit the brakes, at that point, they're essentially all in a row. Everyone is far enough alongside each other for them to be, negligible differences. Piastri on the very inside, he knows that he's on the dampest part of the track and he's coming in at the tightest angle into the corner. So he actually is the first on the brakes, marginally. And Leclerc is last on the brakes on the outside. But Antonelli's trying to play chicken with Leclerc almost, hits the brakes just as late. So the two of them are sailing in pretty hot on the outside, but they've got a bit more grip out there. Leclerc knows this could well end badly 3-1. We need to give each other space, and stays as wide as he can. Really impressive. Antonelli, I think, believes he's hit the brakes late enough to force Oscar to back out of it, or thinks Oscar is backing out of it with the fact that he was slightly earlier on the brakes, and turns in for the corner pretty much as if there's no car on his inside. There's contact then with Piastri's right front hitting Antonelli's left rear, knocks the rear out of Antonelli's car, so then the rear end sliding round smacks into the front left of Leclerc's car on the outside, who was trying to stay out of it all, and that means Leclerc retires with damage. The other two do carry on, but Piastri gets a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision. Where I get frustrated is that the driving standards guidelines, for one, are called guidelines. They're not rules. You do not have to follow them to the letter. They're there to help make decisions. And in that, it says about having, if you're trying to overtake on the inside of another car, you have to have your front axle in line with the wing mirror of the car you're trying to overtake on the approach to the corner to the apex. Now, certainly heading in when they hit the brakes, Piastri has that achieved. Beyond that point, I feel like it's a bit silly to say it still needs to be there at the apex, because if the car you're trying to overtake hits the brakes so late and just turns in on you, leaves you no room, well, they've instigated that contact, but because they've got their mirror ahead of your front axle, regardless of whether they're making the corner or not, they're going to earn a penalty for the driver trying to do the overtaking. And it seems to then discourage the move in the first place. I think Piastri did everything he could. There was a slight lock-up just as they were getting towards the apex, because Antonelli's closing down on him. He doesn't lose control of the car. The wheel basically keeps rotating anyway, but also he's making the corner. He's still turning in and getting rotation from the car. He's in full control, but he can hit the brakes no harder. He can't genuinely, the term they always use is, I can't just disappear. And that's the only way that the contact then doesn't happen, is if he disappears or cuts the corner, which would have resulted in a loss of control as well. And I feel like the stewards saw a bit of a lock-up, and they saw the fact that as they got to the corner, by then Antonelli's gone further ahead, having hit the brakes later, and fully blamed Piastri, gave him whole blame. But the off-board shows quite clearly how much space had been left by Leclerc on the outside, and then how much more room Antonelli had to work with, and he wasn't, and he was acting as if Piastri wasn't there. I don't think Antonelli in any way, shape or form deserves a penalty for that either. He's trying to race hard and he's trying to squeeze Piastri. But he had a role to play in that collision where he could have avoided it, and he kind of instigated it. And I feel like that meant that you could not say Piastri was wholly responsible. That's what the stewards said. They said it was all on Piastri, nobody else. And I just feel like that's completely unfair. And it discourages racing. It says if you go for a move and there's contact, it doesn't matter how it comes about, you are going to be the one who's penalised. And that will say to a driver, next time, don't go for it. 3 wide into turn 1, don't want to see it. Back out. And fans don't want that. Drivers don't want that. Nobody wants that. And the fact that 2 of the drivers involved, and the one who was the innocent party and got eliminated, says, I think that was 50-50 and Kimi shouldn't have turned in. That says everything to me. So at worst, I think you give Oscar a 5-second time penalty, because you say he was the main cause of the collision by being the car on the inside that did hit another car and was attacking. Even that I would have thought was harsh. Basically, I'd have said racing incident. You've got 3 wide into turn 1 on a race restart. How else is that going to go quite often? But we want them to be racing, and these drivers know the risks. And the fact that the guy that took the least risk got taken out and still could say, nah, it's between the 2 of them and no one's really to blame, I think really should have been the answer to the stewards. So that frustrated me a lot. But stewards admittedly are under a lot of pressure to make decisions there and then, especially when it involves a title contender. In this situation, they're thinking, people will have a huge go at us if we say we'll investigate it after the race and we're listening to everyone make their excuses. I quite often say, you are the referees, make your decision. Look at what you've got, make your decision. I feel like they got this decision wrong, but the one thing I do praise them for is trying to make the decision there and then. They see it, they judge it. and then everyone knows what they're racing with moving forward in the rest of that race in terms of penalties. So that was the only thing I was pleased with their attempt. But I do feel like using the guidelines and just reading them as they are, black and white, and then applying it to a still frame when there were so many other factors involved was not realistic in terms of how you should have been judging that incident.
So, Chris, look at a sport. I didn't think I'd be doing this on a Formula One podcast, but look at a sport like ice skating, or look at a sport like diving, where there is a mixture of the objective, but it is obviously there is a huge amount of subjective as well. There are guidelines, but then there are opinions on top of it. It strikes me that we've got the same thing here when it comes to the rules of engagement in Formula One. As you say, there are guidelines, but in the end, a group of stewards make the final call. Do we at RACER have A, the right blend of stewards, and B, the right sort of like mindset when it comes to the objective and the subjective when it comes to these decisions?
I think they're probably not far off with the blend. I wouldn't think it actually needs radical change in that sense, maybe just a bit more towards the subjective, but that then has to tie in with the stewards, like you say, and the makeup of them. And I think the biggest thing is, one, they're not permanent and they're not paid professionals. They're essentially volunteers and they're rotating all the time. And I've been in an FIA stewards seminar where they talk about how they would train stewards, and so people can understand the process of stewarding and look into if they want to train to be a steward. And the inability, when I was in one, for everyone to follow the same template when they wrote out a decision was remarkable. One, I was surprised by some of the opinions on some of the racing incidents we saw, but I was like, you know what, that's also kind of good. It shows there are different opinions, and people then have to come to a consensus across a wide variety of opinions. But as simple as you just follow a template then to how you write out the penalty, and they couldn't even do that. And I'm like, if you had the same people doing the same job every race, you get complete consistency in the way a decision is written out, is delivered, but also in terms of the people that are making those decisions. So the drivers know what is likely to be the outcome. Because it rotates, there are times that someone will be a bit more subjective and go, this was a restart and there were 3 wide, so we're going to use that as mitigating circumstance, not give a penalty. Whereas somebody else is going to go, we've got guidelines we're meant to follow, we're going firmly with them. That's completely on X driver. And I think as long as the drivers had certainty of who is making the decisions and how they make them, then they don't have time otherwise to think and go back and compute who's in the stewards room today. What might they think of this? They need to know it's the same every week or every 2 weeks. And therefore, I think that's where you're right, that we need permanent stewards, permanent paid stewards. There is so much money in this sport. And yes, a lot of it is on the Formula One side rather than the FIA side. But this is one of the pinnacle sports globally. And I cannot believe we still have a discussion about should we have permanent stewards or not. They should be well paid. They should be very good at what they do. It should be a pool maybe of 6 or 8, of which you're trying to stick with the same 4, but you have the few replacements every now and then. Because logistically, maybe it is too much to ask people to do 24. And that should be their full-time job. And to be honest, I think if it was someone's full-time job and they could leave a race and not have to do anything until the next race, then they would commit to 24 races a season. And they would help give us certainty and continuity. That would mean even if we were debating whether a decision was right or wrong, it was being done over the subjective that we were kind of all it's opinions on, rather than the inconsistency. And I think that's the most infuriating thing about it.
That's a very good point about the sort of being able to second guess and be familiar with, the way a steward would go. You've got it in IndyCar where, drivers basically can sort of judge their moves against, this is what Harry Lyondike would determine. MotoGP, for instance, okay, Freddie Spencer may not have been the most popular guy when it came to sort of handing out the penalties. You've got it where I think it's Chris Medland now who is sort of like the guy who sort of does it actually it probably isn't Chris Medland, but they have a permanent guy, and you can basically judge it almost like a baseball umpire. You know that a baseball umpire will always call a ball if it's slightly low or whatever. But those permanent stewards, does it have to be a driver? Do you need the perspective of somebody who has a different mindset? Basically, who should be that permanent frame of reference?
I think a driver would really help, yes, and realistically should be in there. And that's something they have worked to do, but they've not been able, because they don't make it a well-paid full-time position, they've not been able to secure always the highest quality ones in terms of the ones that are available. Like everyone who's done it, I think actually has been a good addition. But then there's a number of drivers that have left the sport more recently and they're not interested because it's not lucrative or it's not attractive enough to go and do. But also, I think if you've got that, you then need to supplement it with high quality stewards that might have experience from other areas, but at the very least know the rules. You look at NFL referees, most of them haven't played in the NFL, but they are experts in the rule book and how the game is played in terms of how they need to referee it. And that is a skill unto itself. And that's something that I do think you can still get with stewards that aren't ex-drivers, but you do, because you can have a room of multiple, I think having an ex-driver in there is very, very important. And that would really help, I think, just give credibility to the whole system. If you went full-time permanent stewards, but none of them were ex-drivers at the highest level, doesn't always have to be F1. F1 drivers will moan that it's very different driving a Formula One car and how very light contact can be very penalising. So you have to look at it differently to sports cars. But they still do get vehicle dynamics. They do get driver intent. They do get the understanding of momentum and lines and the impact of a lockup. So they still, just with anyone who's had high-level racing experience, I think would be good for that. But that's again where the investment needs to come in, that you probably could end up with a pool of potentially very good stewards, but you've got to make sure you then take them up to the pinnacle, to the top level, where you go, these are brilliant stewards, and therefore they're going to have that bit more trust, even when people disagree with their decisions. When they get them right, you're going to get people to come out and say, fair play, that was a tough call, and they got that right, or more people think they got it right than wrong, and that will come from. Or
if you don't agree with them, you are disagreeing with them on a consistent basis.
Absolutely,
they always do the same thing that you don't agree with. So
and you get a read on them, and if it then means something becomes problematic because you're saying, they're hampering racing because they always penalise X move, well then that can be a discussion in a proper professional forum, because these are full-time professional stewards. It kind of would feed itself better. So again, it all comes back to just investing in it.
Okay, back to Las Vegas. It is year 3 for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. We've had 2 years. We've had 2 different winners. We had Max year 1. We had George Russell last year. Where do we stand with Las Vegas as an event, as a flagpole, basically in the championship, as a must see? Just give us your take on how Las Vegas is working out. We had the first year where lots of craziness, but a fantastic race. We had the second year, which maybe is F1's equivalent of the difficult second album. So year 3, where are we, do you think?
It's quite funny because that difficult second album was by design as well. They chose to make it a difficult second album because of the first one having made a lot of noise, cost a lot of money, and still had some teething problems. And they thought, right, let's get the foundations shored up in year 2. And now this year they said they're ready to make a splash again, and they're going to make some more noise. And certainly Saturday, race day or race night, is going to be a really big show, pre and post race. And I personally must admit, and I know this won't be the most popular opinion, but I love it. I absolutely love it. I think just the fact that we have got the sport to a place where it's so big that it has shut down the strip to go racing down it at night on a Saturday night is incredible. That's the pull now and the power of Formula One. To me, that's a great barometer for where the sport's got to compared to 10 years ago, for example. But also, it's the last really big event of the year to me. Like crowd size, interest around it. We can get some great racing at Qatar, for example. It's a high-speed circuit that can be actually pretty fun. It's a good test for an F1 car. Abu Dhabi has the drama, and it's a really beautiful facility, actually, for what they've built. But for both, like, the crowds are pretty small because of the location, and they don't carry quite the same or anywhere near the same atmosphere as some other races. And having just had the run we've been in Singapore, which feels like a big event. Then you get Austin, which is one of the biggest we ever get and is enormous. Mexico, the same, and such passionate fans. Brazil carries that trend on. Each one of those, you stand on the grid, and when there's a title to be fought for, pre-race, you feel that energy and tension. You feel like you're at the heart of something big. I feel like every F1 race should feel that way. This is a massive sport, massive event. Liberty Media always said they wanted 24 Super Bowls. I do think it's impossible to have 24 Super Bowls, but all of them can feel like a championship game. And that is something that I think they do get to, even with Vegas. But then afterwards, that tails off a bit, which, to be honest, that's what I hate. When we go to Qatar and a title gets won in a sprint race in front of 20,000 people, we should be racing in these places and trying to expand the reach of the sport and giving an opportunity for locals to come and watch it. But it just feels like it's at the wrong moment in the calendar. Vegas is the last huge one to me. And they put on such a great show. The racing has been good. That track layout has really worked. It's got some decent sections of high speed, but mainly that long straight into a couple of chicanes, low grip, so it's a challenge for the drivers. The first year's race was brilliant. Amazing work between Max, Checo and Charles. And I was watching Leclerc's overtake on Perez on the final lap back a couple of days ago. That was a heck of a send on the final lap of the Grand Prix. It's exactly what you want. You want to not know what the top three order is going to be until the very final corner. So they've got the track layout right, even with the location they've had to go with. But then they can add so much around it. There's going to be a business summit this year. There's so many huge concerts. F1 Academy's coming along, and that's bringing a load of celebrities with it. There obviously are a lot of A-listers that come to this one. But I think that does create such an interest around the sport outside of those of us that are fans of the sport, but people are just interested in what a celebrity doing or what maybe sports are going on over a weekend. I think it's been a really good addition in that sense. And I know it's not for everyone, but we have 24 races, so they can't all be the same. And this is fully committed to being very Vegas. And I think year 3 is going to be close to year 1 in that style. But I feel like it is really finding its feet and cementing itself and becoming something that's less problematic for the city in terms of setup, but still that puts on a good sporting event in amongst all that glitz and glamour.
We've also got it this year where the race start is brought forward. We've now got it where East Coasters aren't having to basically set their alarm clocks and sort of get up in the early hours to sort of see the race. I had a friend who went there and basically said, I was surprised that I was watching the Las Vegas Grand Prix sort of zipped up in a puffer jacket. But I guess we've found the sweet spot by moving it a little bit earlier. We've still got all of the glitz. We've still got sort of full send on the neon. I mean, we wouldn't have the same type of racing, I guess, if suddenly Las Vegas was basically, racing from in the dusk hours or whatever. It seems that, it sort of swings and roundabouts. You need the darkness, you need the neon, but we've got a good compromise this year in terms of the start time.
Yeah, much better. One of the reasons it was so late before was also because they wanted to allow to keep parts of the circuit open later into the Saturday evening because of other entertainment options and resorts that need access. And I think, again, by it proving itself, as last year especially, they actually opened up to more general admission tickets, lower price points, as well as the high-end stuff, and they got a more diverse crowd in there and a bigger crowd in. Then they've realised, actually, there's reach here that we can focus a bit more on the race itself. But you're right. I mean, this year, I don't think it would have mattered what time the race took place. I think it's going to be cold anyway. I think the high, sorry to do Celsius, but I think the high is 11 during the 3 days of race action. And today was 25. Like, today was a lovely warm day to be out and about in the daytime. Qualifying looks being very low.
I'm going to do a quick conversion. 25, I believe, is round about 76, 77. 11 is...
I can switch to Fahrenheit on my phone because I have to do this a bit more often, especially when we're heading stateside for races. So yeah, today actually the high is 78, which is 25. So it's up in the high 70s. But Saturday, which brilliantly now actually, if this holds, I've got a threat of rain on Saturday on my phone, which is
good Lord,
amazing. And it's Saturday evening, quite a strong chance of rain, 85% chance of rain. Now, I know this might go out in a couple of days, but hopefully this is holding when we're talking about it, because that will add another curveball into the mix.
Oh my goodness me.
But we're looking there at race time, we're looking at 56. And on Friday, it was even colder at race time. It's it looks like it's picked up because of the cloud. So Saturday will be the coldest one now at 56 at race time. That's a challenge. That's a challenge for anyone. And the high that day is 63, so it's not going to be warm at any stage. But yeah, adding some rain as well. People are going to be not only zipping everything up, but putting the hoods up as well.
As Chris has said, though, let's bring in the proviso. By the time you see this, things could have changed again. Chris, the nature of the track, the sort of the grip, the surface grip, the long straights into some pretty gnarly turns. I mean, that characteristic, I guess a lot of it was based on this is what you do have as a layout, on the strip and the streets and stuff. But it all seemed to have added up to a track which is basically, as you say, it's delivering. It's the sort of track where it adds to the drama.
It is indeed. It really is. And there's a lot there that is packaged well together. I've actually just realised as well, talking about the weather and get excited, that I was looking at the wrong Saturday. So all of my excitement has just dissipated massively. That it's actually just going to be cold and not wet. It looks like for the race that we're going to get. But yeah, I think they've put everything together in the right way here. They did say that they started building this event around the track layout, around what can we thread together to create good racing, and then obviously with the strip in the middle of it, but it was everything around that was how do we make something that will make good racing. And it's kind of quite basic, isn't it? You look at the layout, you think it's not got a huge amount to it, but then you watch cars out on track and you actually don't get bored by it. You think that's exciting.
What about we've got it where we've gone over the Drivers' Championship in some detail. We've discussed Max as being the potential, spoiler isn't the word, but could be a surprise depending on events. The battle for second in the Constructors' Championship, it seems to be it's Mercedes versus Ferrari versus Max Verstappen in terms of once again Red Bull being a one-score team. No offense to Yuki, who obviously was put in there in, slightly sort of bizarre and disjointed circumstances, but just give us your take on the battle for second in the constructors and basically the position that Red Bull finds itself in again, sort of in the post Sergio Perez era.
Yeah, I'm much more focused on this point now that I've got over that excitement of the weather forecast. I was so far too distracted from that a little bit ago talking Vegas. But when it comes to,
by the way, when people see this, clever editing may make it sound as though you're not saying it's going to rain on the Saturday, but we'll see. We'll see.
I love you guys for trying to make me look smart, but it's fine. Let's leave it as it is. That I am clearly an idiot because I am one. I'm an excitable little idiot, but I love getting excited about race weekends that are coming up. And but to be fair to you, this is something to be excited about. This battle. It's remarkable that Max is dragging Red Bull into that mix and is doing it single-handedly. I think it will cost Red Bull ultimately. I think Mercedes have taken real control there of that second place fight, and given I expect them to have at least a strong weekend, maybe not the dominant one they had last year, but a strong weekend in Vegas. That should help them cement second place, and they'd need a really big turnaround. I looked up the numbers only a couple of days ago, and Ferrari's top score this season over one race weekend, I believe, was actually in the sprint in Austin. It was certainly a sprint weekend, but it equates to the deficit they currently have to Mercedes, to the point. So Mercedes would need to not score at all over a whole weekend, and Ferrari would need to score their current highest again just to close that gap. Over 3 race weekends, I just don't see that happening. So I think Mercedes is sitting pretty. Max has been very impressive in doing what he's done and dragging the Red Bull in there. But I do also think there's a little bit of leeway I give to not only Yuki, but Liam Lawson, who was in there for 2 races as well. There's been big problems at Red Bull for a long time, certainly on the other side of the garage. And with this generation of car, they've not solved it. They've not even solved that car all season. If the car had been as competitive as it is now, earlier in the year or in the middle of the year at least, not saying that they'd have been winning races ahead of McLaren all the time, but there wouldn't have been like the Hungary result where he's scraping to get into the top 10. They'd have plenty more points on the board, and I think it would be Red Bull's second place to lose. And the only reason they wouldn't get it would be because of the second car. But again, that second car started to pick up some points mid-season. Not huge ones, but more, because it was a little bit more compliant and a little bit more competitive. So I do think it's been a bit, I think it would almost be unfair in many ways for Red Bull to get to second place because they've been so up and down and all over the place. To me, the Mercedes has been a good, solid all-round car. It's not had the highest of highs, but enough for a few wins. But it's not actually had that many that have been really low either. So I think Mercedes will take that one. And I'd really like to see kind of moving this forward beyond the question you're asking, I know, but in 2026, I personally like to see Red Bull stick with what they've got, driver lineup-wise. I want to see the impact of a new generation of car on those drivers, because if you make a change, I think the most likely thing is Isaac Hadjar goes into the Red Bull seat alongside Max Verstappen. Well, I think Isaac would then look pretty good alongside Max in a new era of car, because it will be a different dynamic. They'll all be learning how to handle a new car, but it won't have the same limitations that the previous cars had, and everyone will be learning to engineer them too. If you had Yuki still in that car, you'd then see that step and the impact of that by having the same driver. But when you change driver, people will then assume it was the driver's fault, not that it's the difference in the car. So I think that would be the best thing they could do. I don't think it's the most exciting thing, and that's why they won't do it. But that's where I feel like actually we maybe need to still give even more credit than we do to Max and what he's done to have that car up there, but also a little bit less of the criticism of any driver that's gone in, whether it was Checo, Liam or Yuki, because all of them have really floundered over the last 18 months.
Chris, you brought up 2026. Obviously, for 2026, we get a major technical rule set, modifications to the engine rules. We get rid of the MUH. We also get more electrical power relative to combustion engine power. We also get a huge makeover on the aerodynamic rules. Is there a strange kind of like tension between the fact that everything is working so well at the moment? You know, we've got it where we do have 3.5 teams capable of winning races. We've got it where, you know, we've got a championship which looks like it could go down to the wire. And yet we have a reset in 2026 with the usual caveat that resets normally sort of rearrange the order but give us a dominant team. It just seems, obviously the timing was worked out several years ago, but it does seem sort of frustrating, slightly odd that we do change a good thing at this point.
But it's the nature of Formula One, as in there are a set of regulations that you exploit and they're the same for everyone, but you build your own car and then you kind of do hit diminishing returns. But you also need to keep moving with technology, with the rest of the world, which is one of the things they're doing here. What, as you say, dropping the MGUH is because it's not made it into relevancy for road cars, and it's a big expense and a heavy item in the power unit. And they said we could save a lot of money and weight by dropping that because it's not got value to anyone. Whereas Audi coming in as an engine supplier, for example, now is because the power unit, as it will be in 26, has a lot of road relevancy. So they see, you know, the 50% electrical energy component will be very helpful for a lot of their electric cars, but also their hybrids. Then you've got sustainable fuels, which works on a number of fronts, whether you're running a hybrid or thinking, hey, can we end up with V8s back in our cars on sustainable fuels? There's a lot of the avenue being right. So they had to make that change. There is a bit of a Frankenstein element to the new cars with what they've written for the rules for the power units. They're retrospectively trying to fit aero rules around it that let the power units survive, which I do think has been a problem, but they've at least improved that situation a lot in development up to now. I don't think it will make for quite the enjoyment that the drivers will want straight off the bat, but developments will improve that year on year. But I'd also argue that this year has been less competitive than last year. McLaren, for most of this year, have had a clear advantage. They wrapped up that Constructors' Championship as early as Red Bull did in their most dominant 23 year. And we expected this year to be closer. At the end of last year, I thought Red Bull will iron out the problems that have suddenly hit them towards the end of the season that opened the door for a bit of pressure on Max. I thought McLaren had shown by winning that title and coming through as strongly as they had that they should stay at the front, but they still needed to hit the ground running at the start of the season. Ferrari had actually outscored everyone at the second half of the season. Certainly Charles Leclerc had been the top scorer from the summer break. You were certain they were going to stay in the fight. And Mercedes probably had the biggest weaknesses to solve, but if they could make it a 14 battle. In the end, what happened was McLaren went a step ahead of everyone. Mercedes did a solid job and have ended up as kind of the second place team in terms of not the highest highs or lowest lows, but able to win races. Red Bull have still had their problems, but Max has done what Max does and somehow dragged himself into contention. And Ferrari have disappeared to nowhere, despite it being the last year of regs. So I don't actually think we're throwing away at a brilliant thing. I think this year promised a lot more than we've had. And I think being under the cost cap now and so many teams being stronger, look at Williams, where they're at. We've had 7 teams on the podium this year, but I don't think that's a reflection of convergence of rules necessarily. That's played a part, yes, but I think it's partly impact of the cost cap. Everyone's strong. Everyone has good driver lineups. Everyone has good strength and depth in their engineering teams. Everyone's able to build a decent car. Some will get it right, some will get it wrong next year, yes. But I think we'll start from one of the closest starting points we've ever had in a set of new regulations. Maybe bar Cadillac, because that's a big question mark about what they can do as a brand new team, because they're building a team at the same time as building a car. But for the other 10, the existing 10, even with Audi in their own engine, I do think we're going to end up with a much closer starting point, which will only get closer again. And it mixes up the order potentially a little bit, adds some jeopardy, adds some value to this year's title fight. One of those McLaren guys should win it. Would it be their only chance? I'd back McLaren to be strong next year, but who knows? They might not get it right under the new regs, and that was their one shot to win a title. Sure. You get that dynamic because of these changes. So I'm not quite so upset by that. I think it's one of the things that F1 does well. And I think it's also a step in the right direction in terms of a slightly lighter approach to the power unit to aim for lighter cars in future, slightly smaller cars, getting rid of certain elements that people didn't like DRS, as much as we've got active aero, which I'm sure people won't like as well. So there's steps in the right direction that we can go further down the line. And I think this is probably a good way to go. I think that the current generation of car seems to suit a very specific driving style, and certain teams have really got it right. But if you get it wrong, you disappear away from competitiveness. And I think that's almost been infuriating every now and then. So I think with the strength and depth now of the grid, I'm actually quite excited to see what that does when we have a rules reset.
Just throw a couple of things out there then for 2026. Get your take on these, Chris. Red Bull Powertrains, a completely in-house power unit, obviously with backing and some input from Ford. How do you think that's going to pan out? And also, as a caveat to that, their current partner Honda moving to Aston Martin with the figurehead of Adrian Newey. As you said in a RACER story just now, Adrian Newey, who is becoming obsessed, is basically, back into sort of I think he described it as almost like being in a trance-like state in terms of working out where Aston Martin is for next year.
Yeah, it's his wife that's complaining.
Oh, it's his wife who thinks he's in a trance, So
and he says, I can understand that. They're the team I'm kind of most intrigued about, actually, of the existing teams. It is, what can Aston Martin do in partnership with Honda? Everything has been building to 2026 for Aston. Like every hire they've made, the investments they made, the new factory, getting everything online at the right time. I still don't think everything hasn't quite settled down after all that movement yet. It's not really in the perfect place to exploit everything, but it needs to show a proper step forward. It needs to be, I dare say it, a race winner or contending for race wins at times next year. But that does come with the caveat of, for example, if Mercedes get it right on the power unit front and Honda is slightly off that, then there's enough Mercedes-powered teams to keep you away from that battle. So,
right, yeah.
Especially if you look at the strength and depth of the Mercedes-powered teams, beyond McLaren, who I think are the strongest. Everyone says Mercedes is the best place to be because of what happened in 2014. But for the last 3 or 4 years, McLaren have more often than not been beating Mercedes with their own engine. So what's to say that would change? So I'd kind of back McLaren to be stronger than Merc. Then I'd say Williams could be exciting to watch with the trajectory they're on. And Alpine have always built a good chassis out of Enstone, but haven't always had the engine, and they'll have a Mercedes engine in the back. So there's 4 teams there that could be very strong. So then it's, well, can Aston be in that mix? That's a real unknown, but they've put everything in place for it to work. They've left no stone unturned, and they've left no check unsigned as well. So I do expect to see something strong from them, and if we don't, I actually fear for what comes next. Like if they're still in the same place, heads will roll. I don't know whose, but more will roll, and that could be quite a soap opera to follow. I think, in a sense, hopefully not. You've got Fernando Alonso in an iconic, racing brand with Honda engine, Adrian Newey at the helm in terms of design. It should be great, and it would be great to see them be successful. But I just wonder on that front. Whereas you asked about Red Bull and their own powertrains thing, I think it would be remarkable, even with Ford support, but I think Red Bull have tried to direct everything more themselves, feeling that they have the more recent F1 knowledge. I think it'd be remarkable if they were competitive, to be honest. If Red Bull were winning races and it wasn't just a random one-off that Max took advantage of because it was wet and there was a big crash or something, then that would be a heck of a job. I cannot see them fighting for the title next year. I really can't. And again, play this back if they are, because to become a power unit manufacturer when you've never done it before is an enormous undertaking, but also it's one that it's almost impossible to hit the ground competitively. Look at Honda. They had huge engine manufacturing experience when they came back in with McLaren and were nowhere. So, yeah, I would be really surprised to see Red Bull be successful.
You've basically pitched Cadillac next year as being, I mean, there is nothing to lose. It's basically a win-win for Cadillac. It's a year of experience building. Obviously, they will have Ferrari's 2026 power unit, but I mean, aside from sort of gaining knowledge, aside from sort of like, building that sort of institutional knowledge, it's all about 2027, isn't it, for Cadillac?
Absolutely, on a number of fronts, maybe even beyond, actually, because I still think there's a lot of stuff that won't come online quickly enough. I mean, the development that they've got going on at Fisher's for the headquarters there is remarkable, but I'm hearing that will probably open kind of summer of 26. Well, if it's opening then, they won't get everything transitioned over to be being produced and being manufactured and up and running properly in time for the 27 car to be fully impacted by it. It will have an influence, but then you're probably looking at the 28 car might be the first design that is all out of Fisher's. And even so, that's still going to be influenced by the 26 and 27 car because it's the same regulations unless something strange happens. So I do think that it will be a long way down the line till we see the true kind of impact of the full Cadillac setup. But you're right, it is nothing to lose because they've been very good at being open with us as media. And we got invited to Silverstone in the summer to have a look around the facility they've got there, which is, they view it as temporarily their home because they're building the US bases. They're going to need to service cars and equipment and do a lot of trade with Motorsport Valley in the UK. But also, they don't want that to be their headquarters. It just kind of has to act that way right now because it's quicker to set it up. It's where there's personnel already and they can get to work. But they're building that facility at the same time as building their first car. So you go into a warehouse that has 1/3 sectored off to be logistics, and it's all open plan still. It's going to become their whole logistics building, but for now, only 1/3 of it is logistics. 1/3 of it is the model shop, and they're creating wind tunnel model parts, and 1/3 of it they were doing, I think, crash testing, or they were going to do a seat fit on some breeze blocks. They just have to make do, and they're opening the doors to say, hey, this is how we're having to do it right now, because we got confirmation so late. And realistically, I think the time frame I was given was you'd want 3 years of being a non-racing entity that was doing nothing else except build the infrastructure before you started designing and building a car to be anywhere close to the level you'd need to be comfortable with what you're doing. But you don't get that choice. You don't get told you can enter in 3 years, start building a team. You get told you're in next year, your car better be ready. So I think they've done the right...
To be clear as well, they haven't taken the harsh approach of basically using everything they can from another constructor.
Correct. They're taking very little from Ferrari. They are taking the Ferrari power unit, obviously, and a few other associated components, but not much at all. They want to build everything in-house. That's been part of their approach, is that they're going to be a full constructor with everything. They haven't hired the personnel for that, which takes a long time. It's a lot of people to get in, get all the equipment for it, build it up. So it's a mix right now of stuff they're developing themselves and stuff you can buy out in a supply chain that's not from another team, but that you can outsource manufacturing for because they don't have the capabilities yet. But eventually, a lot of it they plan to design and build in Fisher's in Indiana. That's where they want to get to. So, which would be great if they can make that work. It will be really challenging just because of the way F1 is so centric to a region of the UK in terms of how long it takes to get materials, parts, get it made, get it on a car. All of those things they will have to kind of factor in. But they're confident they can make it work, which will be very impressive. But yeah, that means for now, they've been honest enough to go, we're far from being in that structure. So what we have in mind, we're not there yet. And they know that that's likely to leave them at the back of the grid. It would be a surprise if they designed a car that wasn't. Where they could be helped if they design a solid one and the Ferrari power unit's good, which who knows, might be, might not be. But if it was good, then that should make them competitive enough and maybe avoid being last. But they are very much going for the under-promise and over-deliver. So they're telling everyone they're going to be last. The main thing I've heard actually come out of some personnel that have got involved there is they almost need to start saying, let's not just talk ourselves into being the last place team and then being okay with it. If you keep saying we're going to be last and then we're last, it looks like you've hit your target essentially. And where's the motivation to move forward? So if anything, maybe you should say we're going to be 10th because we're just saying we're going to beat one team. And if we don't, yes, we fail, but we fail aiming to do something more than just show up and make up the numbers. So that's clearly not the Cadillac modus operandi moving forward, is to make up the numbers. But for year one, they are almost talking that way.
And we can't talk Cadillac without getting your take on Colton Herta and the short and long-term prognosis on Colton moving from IndyCar to Formula 2, and obviously with an end game in mind, which is a Cadillac Formula 1 seat. Just give us a path, give us your take on the hurdles, just give us your take on what is plausible in that scenario.
So from speaking to a few people, and one of them that really gave the compelling argument that we ran the quotes from actually was Pato O'Ward in Mexico, saying he just does not think, knowing Colton, he said he doesn't have anything official from Colton, but knowing him and knowing where he's at and what he wants, he could not imagine that he would make the move to race in F2 if there wasn't the promise of an F1 seat in 27, as long as he got the job done in F2. And if that's there, then if you're one of the current race drivers that have gone in for experience to help build that team, but saying you want to be part of a project and you're Valtteri or Checo, then you suddenly think, well, I've got to beat my teammate next year straight out the bat, otherwise I'm going to be the one who gets dropped. And that would change the dynamic where they're talking about needing to be very collaborative because they need to help move the team forward. So I don't think it helps in that sense. And it was actually a point I wanted to make a bit earlier when you said about 27. And I was like, that's another reason why I think 27 is a big year for Cadillac. It could be the year that you have Colton in the car.
Sure.
The downside there would be that I can't see them being overly competitive by 27 either. Maybe moving forward, but not race-winning machinery. And that's the thing that we know is going to really light the touch paper in the States, is if you've got someone like Colton, quick, talented, very good driver, in a strong car, able to get good results. Logan Sargent got a really bad rep, but he was winning races in F2 as a rookie. He was a really good talent. He nearly beat Piastri to the F3 title. Didn't have the backing at the right time and the momentum at the right time. But then Williams fast-tracked him into an F1 seat because they saw the potential, but then didn't help him get the most out of it. They just expected him to deliver. And obviously, American fans had, one, not seen that much of him, or some hadn't seen that much of him because he'd been in the European ladder for most of his career. But two, you're running around in the back of a Williams, it's just not exciting. Like F1 captures the imagination for everyone when you're watching a title fight at the front and who gets a surprise podium or a win. And as much as people wanted to get behind Logan, expectations rightly are much higher for American talents, that they are as good as anyone in the world and they could be winning races if they have the machinery. There are other countries where you see interest where they're just delighted to have a driver there because it's been so long, and they're representing on the world stage and they're very proud of that. And yes, they want them to go further, but their base is kind of a bit more acceptable of great. Brazil recently, Gabriel Bortoleto, absolute hero, amazing talent, stunning rookie, but he's still driving for Sauber in 19th in the Drivers' Championship, and he was worshipped like a god. Logan never got that.
Colapinto too.
Exactly, with no points to his name so far this year. But it's because of what they're representing and putting their country on the map, in a sense, in this sport. For Americans, obviously, they're so intrinsically embedded in motorsport that just being one of them isn't enough. It's got to be one of the best. And I think that's why I really want to see Colton in the seat at the right time. I wonder if 27 might still actually be a bit soon and kind of dampen that fire. But if he does get to that position, it means he's done a good job in F2. And I admire the move. I really do. I think it's the right thing. And I'm still surprised he's done it, because I think it would have been easy for ego to get in the way and say, I'm better than this. I've won an IndyCar. If there was an F1 seat available and I had a super license, I'd be in the seat. People know I'm good enough. Why should I go and do F2? But he knows there's still value. Doing it instead of not doing it with the two options, and doing it is better. You're racing against guys you might be racing in the future. You're learning or relearning some of the tracks. As small as the detail as that would be for someone as good as him, it's still a tiny percentage improvement. Tyres as well are similar-ish, being Pirellis, that will just give him another bit of knowledge in his data bank. So all of these things will be tiny incremental gains over what would have happened if he hadn't driven an F2. And for that reason, that shows how serious he is. He's like, well, then it's worth me doing it, because it will improve me. Even if a tiny bit, it will improve me for the chance I get when I go up to F1. And if it means he's sharper and he's racing wheel to wheel against, say Alex Dunn ends up back in F2 in a Red Bull backed car and is fighting for the title against Colton, and both move up to F1 the next year and they're racing each other on track again, they're going to know each other much better than Colton would know anyone on that grid if he hadn't done F2. So even that could benefit him. So I'm really, really impressed with that move, and I really hope it works out.
Americans in Formula 2 and expectation levels, seamless segue. Jack Crawford. Formula 2 isn't in action at Vegas, but Formula 2, basically, the season culminates with, obviously, the sprint and feature in Qatar, followed by the sprint and feature season finale in Abu Dhabi. Jack Crawford, second full season in Formula 2, is still right there in the thick of the title battle and has got a reserve gig with Aston Martin F1. I mean, you know, everybody is sort of looking at Colton Herta as possibly being the next American Formula One, but, you know, hiding in plain sight, could it be Jack Crawford?
It could. I do think he gets overlooked far too much because he's been around for a little while in the European ladder. And again, I think that's created a bit of a detachment for US-based fans, that they're not seeing them racing on their circuits as often. They're not racing against, if he'd made it to the top of IndyCar, I think he'd just have a bigger following trying to make that move. But, I mean, he won last time out in Baku, won the feature race to really put himself back in title contention. He's 19 points behind Fornaroli, who won F3 last year, and is a very talented Italian, but has just had a really good, consistent year. But Crawford, everyone forgets how young he still is because he's been around for a while. This is his third year in F2, but he only turned 20 this year. He was, I think May was his birthday, and he was going into his third year in F2 as a teenager, and it seemed like, wow, he's past it. That's how some people looked at it. He'd been dropped by Red Bull. He can't be good enough. Again, a bit like the Williams fast tracking of Sargent. Red Bull were trying to beat Williams to get an American in F1, and they were trying to do it with Crawford. And I think to the detriment of his career. They tried to move him up too quickly, too often. And then it's sometimes the little unforeseen things, or the unseen things, where it is a feeling or a certain performance that doesn't yield a set of points, but it's something that a driver does. Jack, in his rookie season in F2, was teammates with Isaac Hadjar. They were side by side in the same team for their first year, and it went badly as a team. They were really uncompetitive. But Jack got the better of Isaac over the course of the season. Not by a lot, but he got the better of him. Now, you can come up with other reasons that might say you'd balance it out, but okay, he was comparable to Isaac. We're talking about Isaac maybe racing for Red Bull next year and being one of the stars of the season. It shows that the talent is huge in F2 anyway, but someone like Jack was as good as Hadjar at the same point. He's just stayed in F2 for a year longer, is fighting for the title like Hadjar was last year, every chance he might still win it, and has experience now with Aston. And Aston saw the potential in him, saw his capabilities, found that he's an excellent driver in the sim, really been helping them on that front. So they wanted to secure his services. And I know Cadillac were looking at him, but were never going kind of down the rookie route in their first year. And then they were lining this up for Colton for year two. So it kind of fell by the wayside. But I do think Jack is good enough. I just don't know if the timing's going to work for him, because if he wins the F2 title, or if he doesn't, he's becoming the third driver and reserve driver at Aston next year anyway. We saw that happen with Felipe Drugovich. That doesn't necessarily lead to a race seat. And if you bring value to the team in your sim work, they're not going to want to let you go if another opportunity might come up, unless it's definitely a race seat somewhere else, which can be hard to secure when you're not racing anymore. But also, let's say Fernando Alonso does one more year and leaves, so there's a vacancy in 12 months at Aston Martin. Would Aston Martin go for a Lance Stroll and Jack Crawford lineup? With the money they have behind them, with the Adrian Newey design, with the Honda power unit, as much as I think Jack has obvious quality, his role would likely be the one next to a superstar. And for as long as Lance Stroll takes up one of those two seats, it won't be someone like Jack, I don't think. It will always be the biggest name going. They'll be chasing Max Verstappen. They'll be chasing George Russell. Yeah. They'll be chasing anyone huge. So I think it's unlikely.
With a chase made easier by the potential of what Aston Martin has now got as the package.
Absolutely. And if that's a race-winning car or a title-contending car, are you putting a rookie in that's been your third driver and done a solid job in the sim, or a very good job in the sim, but hasn't said to you, I am the next Ayrton Senna? Because I think Jack is very good, but no one right now is saying they're the next Ayrton Senna outside of the F1 lineup that I'm seeing. No one in F2. So I do feel that he's just maybe going to end up, he could end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, but it's not to say there was a right place for him to be either. He's done a really good job of proving his value and his worth and his potential and his ability since leaving Red Bull. And I'd say showing Red Bull they were wrong to drop him. But I still just think he'd almost need to win this F2 title in spectacular fashion over the last 4 rounds, which is a tall order to catch the eye in that fashion. And then he'd need to do something impressive at Aston Martin, maybe get a one-off chance when someone's unwell or injures themselves, and he gets to race in F1 and show actually he looks great. And then maybe he might get a race seat somewhere, get a chance that way. But so many drivers, they get this close and this is as far as they get. So I worry that the path isn't there like it is for Colton. There's not clearly a plan to put him in F1. He needs to go and prove he deserves it. And I just wonder if Aston will give him that chance.
Okay, Chris, let's go full circle. We started the debrief talking about prospects for Las Vegas and the potential to maybe not see McLaren at its peak, just based on the track, based on circumstance. Okay, so going out on a limb, and by the way, this is us just reaffirming that this won't be a wet Las Vegas Grand Prix.
I'm checking again to make sure.
Well, I noticed you was distracted again. This will be a chilly one, but most likely a dry one. Chris, who are you sort of pinning as the potential winner in Las Vegas?
I'm going to say Max Verstappen, and that comes with a lot of risk because, as we've seen in Brazil and as we've seen in Mexico, there's every opportunity for Red Bull to not get it right. And to struggle and not put the car in the right window, and especially then when it's cold, maybe struggle to that extent. The low temperatures would very much lean towards Mercedes, but Mercedes has tried to iron out that being a strength because it also meant there's other weaknesses that were there, and I do think they've been more consistent this year, so I don't expect it to suit Mercedes as much as last year. And I think the race performance we saw in Brazil from Verstappen shows actually with the car in the right place, that Red Bull is formidable, especially now it's got a new engine in the back, and they will push that engine hard, and it's a power-sensitive track in Vegas. So I think he's got a good chance at it. He's got nothing to lose. He's won there before. He was still in an uncompetitive car, able to beat the McLarens there last year. So, yeah, I'm going to say Max to do something special and go and put his car on pole and win that race. And hopefully, sorry McLaren fans, but I'm always wearing the hat of what's the most exciting way for the season to go right down to the wire and keep the most interest in it. Hopefully Mercedes is then still strong enough to be ahead of McLaren too, and at best McLaren are fighting over 4th and 5th, maybe even further back, and then that could breathe a bit more life into the championship. So
bigger picture then, that championship, post a disappointing Las Vegas Grand Prix for McLaren, We have Qatar with the last sprint of the year, and obviously the Grand Prix. We then have the Abu Dhabi finale. Are we talking Norris sort of maintaining this momentum, or at least sort of cruising and collecting in a manner which will sort of deliver the goods, or potentially do we have another twist?
I think we have another twist. I'm saying, especially if with this theory that I'm speaking into existence of Max getting a big point swing in Vegas and McLaren having a bit of a tough weekend, which they know they might have. Lando says he's kind of dreading it, which is the right approach too, because they're under-promising, and if they have a tough one, it won't shock them. But if they do well, then they'll look smarter. But I think that will then change the dynamic, because it will start to shift a bit more pressure back on Lando. Whereas up to now, he's had a really good, smooth run. He's outscored Oscar every race since he retired in Zandvoort. And he's had 2 excellent performances, it must be said. Because in Brazil, that car was not in its sweet spot. It was quick. It suited the car. But he wasn't fully happy. You saw he nearly lost out in the sprint. Antonelli nearly got him in the sprint. He couldn't just disappear into the distance in the Grand Prix, to the extent that a well-timed safety car, a red flag, and Verstappen wins that race because he got himself into the lead. And Red Bull stayed aggressive with their strategy, but they could have gone and tried to get to the end on a set of mediums. I still maintain it wouldn't have worked because he'd had to push so hard to get there in the first place. But I still could see that the McLaren wasn't able to negate that threat. It couldn't get far enough ahead of a car that started in the pit lane. But Lando delivered. Lando didn't make any mistakes. His restarts were good. He was pretty faultless. And I think that shows the momentum he's riding and the comfort place he's in. The second you change that dynamic and you put a bit more pressure back on him, that you halt that momentum, how will he respond then? Because he's answering the questions at the moment. I wondered how he'd respond having hit the front, even by 1 point, but being the championship leader after Mexico. And or how he'd respond having a dominant car in Mexico, would he convert? And he responded very well in both cases. But there's still more questions, I think, to be asked. With 3 races to go, there's just that potential. And yeah, I don't want to seem overly harsh on Lando, but we've seen that he can let things sometimes get to him or overthink things or take in external factors. And I do think he might, as much as he says it outwardly one thing, inwardly he might struggle, or he might very much feel the weight of the pressure as he gets close to the finish line. And that title is there for the taking. Now, last year he admitted it after it fell away from him. We got to Vegas, and up to then he'd been saying, I'm not in the fight, you're all talking rubbish, the gap's too big, no chance. And then when he had the bad result in Brazil and Max basically sealed the deal, he was like, I kept telling everyone I wasn't in it, you weren't listening, like, I don't know what more to tell you. Everyone else was silly. And then he came to Vegas and went, I've had a really tough couple of weeks, because you start believing it's going to happen, that you're in the fight. And so he admitted that actually what he was telling us was not what he was feeling. What he was feeling was I'm getting there. So then when he says it's taken away and it disappears in one afternoon, it's really hard to take. I like his honesty after the fact, but I've still got that in mind from 12 months ago, that right now the way he's talking about approaching it will be different. So I still think it'll affect him if someone can shift the momentum, and Vegas might be the weekend that happens.
So hang on a minute. Are you saying that Norris will be world champion, or are you saying that?
I think
that was a brilliant explanation, but you evaded the final result, Chris.
Yes, I think Lando will be world champion.
Okay.
I think he will get it done, but I do not think it will be the cruise to the title that looks like it could become right now. At the start of the year, I said that McLaren would dominate the Constructors' Championship, but that Max would win the Drivers. And in the summer, I remember thinking what an idiot I looked like for saying that. And then 3 or 4 weeks ago, I started thinking I've got to keep telling people I said that at the start of the year, because I'm going to look like a genius if he does this from here. But now I feel like there's that outside chance. But in reality, I think the McLaren drivers are going to have too much. And how much pressure Lando comes under will depend on what Max does in Vegas and whether Oscar can turn around his own kind of downward momentum. But I think the fact that both of those need to come together to really threaten Lando is why I still think he'll get the job done, even if he does struggle with the pressure a bit.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for, well, first of all, so much good stuff, so much insight. Okay, the meteorological stuff was a little bit dodgy, but we have stressed the fact that if you did come in at that point, we've explained the confusion. But Chris, that was...
Who knows? Maybe by the time someone's listening to this, even closer to the race, it might have changed again, and it might be going to rain. And if that happens, we look like absolute geniuses, Lawrence.
Which kind of maybe is why I keep mentioning it then, in that case. So, yeah. But no, Chris, pleasure having you on. I know that you are about to head over from the UK to Vegas. We will, I'm sure, catch up after the season when the dust settles. We will see what we did and didn't get right, but we'll also start the build-up to what should be a fascinating 2026. So, Chris, for the moment, thanks for your time, safe travels, and let's see how Vegas pans out.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lawrence. Can't wait to see how the final triple header goes. And then, like you say, it'll be such a short off-season to ramp it up for next year as well. So, some people are calling it the super season, because we're going to run current F1 cars non-stop from the start of 25 until the end of 26. And I'm loving it.
All right, Chris, speak to you again very soon. And let's all keep tabs on those final 3 races.
Sounds good to me.